Right. Well, look, like I said, thanks again for joining the session. This is about emerging and disruptive technologies, and we'll look at what that means during the course of it. I'm Fraser Henderson. I'm your host this afternoon, and we've got a good 90 minutes, although I don't think we're going to need the full 90 minutes, but it's good to know it's there. So there'll be plenty of time for discussion. And if the numbers do stay small, then, I absolutely want to hear from you. Hopefully you can see my slides just fine. There is, of course, the chat facility here in Zoom, so please do make use of that as well. Just some quick housekeeping things. I tend to look at the chat periodically, so if you do have a question or comment, do put it in there, but I won't necessarily respond immediately. And the content is broken up into chunks, so there'll be some discussion time after each kind of presentation set. If you could keep your microphones ordinarily on mute, and I see you have, that's great etiquette. That just means that, I don't hear your dog barking or the postman, although it could well be that the postman arrives at my house and then you're going to have to hear all of that. If there's a problem, and I tend to mean a problem with my own technology, I will try and reconnect with you all. So give me 10 minutes to try and reconnect if my internet has gone down. Welcome, Helen, to the webinar. So just some simple housekeeping rules from me. And if we stick to these, all's good.
7 different programming languages. There are also
okay, I can see a few more people jumping in the room now, which is excellent. So let me just keep these housekeeping rules up for a few seconds longer. The topic is, as I said, about emerging and disruptive technologies, and I hope to go and look at some of the key ones for you and try and explain how they might be relevant to your business. But I also want to think about ways that businesses become the disruptor, and how you might curate this disruption, or how you might encourage it within your own industry. So quite a lot of content to get through. So this is me. I've given you my Twitter handle here, so you can always contact me after today if you should so wish to do so. I am based in North Lincolnshire, so I'm quite close to the action here in Humberside. And when I was putting together these slides, I thought, have I actually been involved in any disruptive products or services or anything like that during my time on this planet? And I guess I have. I have worked for Philips Research in the Netherlands on some things around acoustics, which I can't tell you about because they're all about patents and secrets. But I have spent most of my life developing innovations in the public sector. So online petitions is one of the things that I had a hand in many years ago, as well as online clinics, the kind of thing that you might get from your GP. So I've dabbled here. I also spent some time at the University of Lincoln looking at tech transfer. So how do we take the research that's going on in universities and commercialize that? Which is a fantastic way for finding out about disruptive or potentially disruptive technologies. Now, I do have a section here about you, and the thing about disruptive tech or anything disruptive is that, I don't know it all, and the people only know as much as they're educated, and it could well be that you're working on something disruptive. So if you are, I encourage you to open up the chat box and type some things to me, because I'd love to learn from you, and I'm sure you'd like to share some of those thoughts or ideas with the others. So feel free to communicate with your colleagues here on the call. That would be fantastic. Now, kicking off this webinar is this rather fantastic quote, and that is, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." And I think this is so true. And you think about the example here on the screen, which is stealth technology. It's been around since, goodness, I think about 1958, years or decades ago. And yet there are still many nations who don't have this technology for whatever reason. The same can be said for, supercomputers or quantum computers. And really this tells me that, the future is already here. And the trouble with that future is that it's not always accessible to everyone, and it hasn't become mainstream. So many of the things you get today in your homes, the technological things that you use and rely on, were probably invented or being used by someone many years ago. They just hadn't filtered through to you because they weren't affordable or practical or so on. And there is a concept which I call inclusive innovation. I think this is so important. You know, if we're going to innovate, we need to make it inclusive for it to be truly useful. Now, if you think historically about disruptive technologies, I've tried to put some on the screen here. The one I'm probably missing is the printing press. And it struck me also that, you know, some of these technologies are not necessarily involving electricity. So gunpowder, rubber, you know, these are material technologies, and they're just as important as the ones that do involve electricity, or in fact, electricity itself. Now, thinking about the previous slide where, you know, I said innovation needs to be inclusive, I guess the modern day example is something like the electric car. They've been around for a little bit, but the adoption rate is slow. And some of these technologies are getting effectively ignored for what's popular. So things become popular over time. The other example here is about the first car, which again was mostly ignored at the time because of its various exclusivities, and you know, people were still going around on horse-drawn vehicles. So these things tend not to happen. Disruptive things tend not to happen or get adopted overnight, although they might appear overnight, and they may have been worked on for many, many years. So I'm just setting the scene with you a little bit. Now, when you say disruptive to someone, they might also think immediately about startups. And, you know, startups are these small, lean groups of hipsters who suddenly work on a project. You know, they get funded by an angel, and they've got the freedom to experiment and develop something which is just going to shake a traditional market. And I guess for most of those hipsters, for most of those startups, the idea might be to be acquired. So this can be quite a profitable venture for the people who put forward the capital. You know, we're going to get acquired by Apple, so let's go for a couple of years with this great idea and then get bought out. Sounds good to me. Of course, most companies may have had a startup phase. I certainly know that, you know, Amazon started from a bedroom, and I know that even the Consumers Association, Which magazine, started from someone's garage. So, you know, this is just, in a way, the way that businesses can build. So why does it matter? And I've got another quote for you here from Darwin. You may well recognize this, and I think it's very poignant in these times of pandemic, really. And Darwin basically said it's the people who adapt that survive. You know, it's not the most intellectual, it's not the strongest. And disruption, in a way, is about adapting. But I think equally it's as important for an established business to be mindful of the disruptors so that they can adapt and adopt technologies in order to survive. So when something new comes along, you know, we really have to think hard about what's the impact on what we're doing of that new thing. Can we incorporate it? Can we copy it? Can we ourselves find something better? So a very important quote, and I hope you take that to heart. Now, disruption, I think Duncan has put it in the chat as it happens, you know, disruption is not just about the technological things, it's about the non-technological as well. So that could be as simple as doing something differently. And, you know, a great example for you here on the screen is a company called Automatic, an American company with around 1,600 employees scattered across the world, never had a headquarters. I don't even think they use email. They are behind some or most of the websites you find on the internet today. And they've always worked in this distributed model. So the innovation could actually be the way that your business runs. You know, the nice thing about Automatic is, of course, they survived the pandemic beautifully, because actually for them, it was business as normal. Everyone working from home, being issued laptops, you know, they have a way of networking together, and it just works. So, you know, you can absolutely disrupt your business in a number of ways. One is technology. One is reinventing how you do things, how you sell things, how you market things. And Duncan, we'll talk about adoption, I think, as part of this, because you're right. Being an early adopter can be difficult for people. There are typically some problems with things when they're first created or invented. And I've got a slide about that, so we will cover your point. So innovation is not invention. Subtle difference for you. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is that there are degrees of novelty, and what we see more frequent than not are incremental innovations. So incremental changes to things. The classic example I've got for you is the light bulb. Okay, so you know the light bulb's been around for ages. We've got the traditional filament light bulb, then we had the LED light bulb, and now we've got the smart light bulb, or the LED color light bulb. And there are just little innovations that have been layered on top of an original concept. By the way, you know, Philips made a fortune from the patents of the light bulb. It's you know, a great patent to hold, as they did the CD. But what happens with CDs? We've got CDs, we've got DVDs, we've got Blu-rays, and so on. These radical improvements are slowing down. If you look at scientific discovery, you know, you could argue that there are fewer of them out there to discover, but they are harder to achieve. And that might be for a number of reasons. And I've got some examples here on this slide. It could be that you just don't have the skills or capabilities to achieve this radical improvement. Thinking about the Iranian centrifuge and their ambitions to enrich uranium. It could be you don't have sufficient material supply. I think about Tesla and their need for lithium for batteries, or even battery production. You know, it's not something they're in. It could be that the innovation you seek is just prohibited. So the atomic weapon, you know, you couldn't actually develop science around it. And indeed, you might have, you know, patents and so on, which are insurmountable. So it is very difficult to achieve this radical improvement. But when you do, that's where the real disruption comes from. It doesn't tend to come from the incremental changes. It comes from these big leaps or advances in thinking. So yes, let's think about the big radical changes. Now, believe it or not, back in 2012, the UK government published a paper describing 8 great technologies. So it was a blueprint for the technologies the government was endorsing as, you know, the big economies for the driver in the future. And later it went on to add 2 more. So I just wanted to go through this list and give you a flavor for what they are. I don't think there are any here, by the way, that you won't have heard of. So that's the good news. The first one, big data, you know, quite obvious to me that if you are a business that deals with data, the data has got value. And I guess people are saying that data is the new oil. So if you are in an industry that's not dealing with data or capturing data, then absolutely do start to do that. The second is satellites and space. We've seen recently the Starlink satellite constellation from Elon Musk, which is going to provide internet access anywhere on Earth. You know, absolutely an innovation in terms of low orbit satellites. And there will be, I think, a militarization of space. So I think we're going to see a lot of space type initiatives. Then we've got robotics, you know, something that's been around for a long while, but increasingly we're reliant on in manufacturing and so on. And if you think about today, with a lack of, you know, drivers or builders, we're going to see autonomous systems and robotics try and replace some of those deficits in labor and so on. Synthetic biology, number 4 there, is really about, well, it's biological engineering. So it might be creating an organism that eats our waste or gets rid of, some nasties, very important in terms of the decarbonization initiatives going on. So again, it's branches of biology as well as physics here. And regenerative medicine, which is about growing tissues and cells, great for fixing ourselves and for medicine. Agri-science, think about GM crops, think about, again, automation, robots which will go and pick our vegetables or our strawberries or whatever. Lots of work, by the way, going on with that in Lincoln. Advanced materials, you can probably imagine what that is. Think about carbon fiber, and I've got some other materials to talk to you about later. And then you've got nanotechnology, which is using or building things, useful things from tiny components like cells and atoms. And then we've got energy, which is got a clear link to the Humber. So quite a rounded set, I think you'll agree, of technologies provided by the government, and they had plans there for investing in the research around each of these. The 2 they added later on, quantum, which I've got a whole section on for you because there are some amazing applications for quantum, or quantum 2.0 to be precise, and then the Internet of Things, which is about internet-connected sensors or devices. So, a lot of technology that is coming through the pipeline that I know of. There's probably more that the government is interested in, and to an extent which the UK is leading on. So, great time to be excited about disruptive things. So what are some practical examples? I've got a few for you, and the reason I want to give you practical examples is, as I said earlier, if you have sight of some of these things, you can think about how your businesses and industries might go about adopting them or adapting them, or just making sure that whatever you're currently doing is ready for the introduction of these things. I'm going to start in the top left about blockchain. You may well have heard of blockchain, and I'm talking about really a mathematical concept, which means that we can have the likes of cryptocurrencies, currencies which are digital, yet they have an absolute audit trail, and they can't be reverse engineered, and they're finite. You can't create more without everyone else knowing about them. So these have exploded, and you've seen them probably in the media. You may know that we're going to get a digital euro, and it looks like we are going to get a digital pound. So cryptocurrencies are absolutely here to stay. But there is another branch of crypto tech, which is non-fungible tokens. I'm sorry for the language. These are what the hipsters come up with. And basically, this is a new way looking at ownership. So it could be that your mortgage deeds are issued in this tokenized way, so that everyone knows and proves that that your house is yours because there's a trusted algorithm. And people are starting to trade things like art and craft using crypto art, which is basically a way of saying, I've traded ownership of this piece of art with you, but you don't actually have the art, or you own a digital version. It's a bit of a mind bender, but basically what I'm saying with crypto is that this is changing or disrupting ownership. And in trading things like crypto art, anyone involved in the trading chain can take commission. So it's also sort of changing the dynamic of the profits. I will take a pause in a minute, so I appreciate I'm talking to you a lot, but there will be a chance to discuss these. Bottom left there, I mentioned about automation. I think we're going to see the building trade, the building industry, take advantage of more building robots. And you're probably all familiar with the idea of things like, you know, fabrication, 3D fabrication. We're going to get a lot more ways to emulate and simulate and replicate in a digital world things like the flow of fluids through pipes. And this means our engineering is going to get a lot better, going to have to do a lot less trial and error in the real world. Top right there, this is Rolls-Royce, who have been recently commissioned to produce what I'm calling small nuclear reactors. These are the kind of nuclear reactors which might be found in a submarine, could well be at your local Tesco's. Maybe a horrifying thought, but the point here is, whilst the tech has been around for a while, Rolls-Royce are working on modular manufacturing. In other words, ways of sort of creating these things in a way which, when they're on site, they can be built very quickly and operate very quickly. So you can imagine, you know, everything arriving flat pack, and they just kind of fit together and work. The idea that things can be so complex yet modular, I think, is a great piece of disruptive tech. What else? So briefly, quickly on this slide, you know, we're going to get a lot of military things, which are probably less interesting to you. I think, well, we're seeing already flexible screens. Samsung have got a number of flip phones which have just started to move that to the kind of consumer domain. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see some innovations, maybe not public yet, about high-speed engines. PulseJet is the one to look out for. Hypersonic travel, I suspect, will be back on the cards before you know it. We've seen in America, they've got something called Hyperloop. This is about high-speed travel using magnetic levitation. I wouldn't be surprised if we get more of that here. And, you know, the government's already talking about how it doesn't want to use airplanes for short travel because of the carbon impact and so on. And I think people are more conscious themselves of their carbon imprint. We've got the airless tire, could be quite uncomfortable to drive on, but certainly something that I could do with. You know, I expect we'll see some radical things like that. And another exciting one, top right here, an aerogel, which, if you don't know what that is, strong as steel, very light, not dense. Basically, it's a gel in which the air has been extracted. It's got amazing thermal properties. That's actually a flame on the aerogel, not burning the flour there. So this is a material which could be used quite readily in insulation, for example, or in a bulletproof vest. And whilst it's expensive, I think about $1 per cubic centimeter, I suspect that when that becomes mainstream, more and more people will be using it in building supplies and so on. So that was a very quick, you know, cut through of some things that are on my radar, which I think are basically ready for market. 3 other things to watch: augmented reality, already here, but, you know, great for engineering and training. More personalized advertising, and I think we're going to get to a point where we'll see more urban farming, particularly because we've got supply chain issues. In the more distant future, there are some other exciting technologies which we need to be aware of, that I know of. And I guess this is a bit more speculative because some of these things are in progress or not yet working. But I do think we'll see frictionless bearings quite soon. And that means we're going to have really efficient wind turbines. We might even have kinetic storage units. Oh, a phone call. There we go. Must have heard me say kinetic power storage units. Frictionless bearings, I think, will be useful in a whole bunch of applications. Magnetic refrigeration is basically using magnetic effects to get a cooling effect. I haven't seen much research on this recently. I know that people are working on it. You can imagine it's a low carbon technology, and I would love to see the world free of, you know, CFCs and traditional refrigerators. So Very useful in electric cars as well for keeping batteries cool, stuff like that. The electronic nose, you can imagine the applications for something like that, sniffing out COVID-19, fantastic. Security at the airport, I think we'll see a lot of applications for something that replicates the human senses. Asteroid mining, well, you've seen it on TV, you've seen it in the movies, definitely a way of getting our minerals or metals that we need, like lithium, important for some other disruptive tech. And swarming robots, I know this is work ongoing in the defense industry, mainly for defense, but also I think we'll get things like what we've seen them already at the Olympics, where we have unmanned vehicles doing displays instead of fireworks. Definitely applications there. So as I said, I've given you quite a few examples of things in my head. I wonder, I'll open up the session now to any of you, if you've got any or heard of any exciting disruptive things that are going on in your industry. Does anyone want to speak out? Don't be shy. You can always put this in the chat box if you don't want to say something. Ian, did you have are you off mute? Maybe not. I can't encourage you yet. Well, look, there are these interludes that run all the way through the workshop. So, do feel free to chip in. It could be that you can't tell me, of course, and I appreciate that this is being recorded. So I will carry on. All right. So as a recap, disruptive technologies alter the way that businesses or industries operate. And, it often forces companies to change their direction for fear of losing out. And we can think of many examples of technologies like the internet, really, which have broken traditional businesses or long-established businesses like Blockbuster Video. I've got on the screen here, 3 businesses which I think have been quite disruptive. I've mentioned electric cars many times. Tesla have come in and disrupted the automotive industry, and now the government's talking about no combustion engines from 2030, and everyone's really playing catch up. You've got Dyson, who came in with the Cyclone and with the fanless hairdryer and the fanless fan, and they changed the way that people look at those consumer products. And you've got Uber, who really came in with a disruptive business model and said, look, taxis are going to be different now. We're going to give you an app, and we're going to work on the basis that everything's digitized. So there are some examples of businesses that have grown very quickly and made a lot of money from being disruptive. Will they stand the test of time? I don't know. Certainly every major vehicle manufacturer has now got an electric division. So being first to market isn't necessarily a good thing for these businesses, but what they probably do have is technologies which are ahead of the curve, or understanding of an appreciation of real world situations. So they were able to test their business model, their products, and understand where the issues lie. And to that extent, they'll be the class leader for a while. Change is always coming, and we have to adapt to survive, as Darwin said. I mentioned Blockbuster Video because I think it's a great example of a business that was destroyed by the internet. But equally, wireless internet, well, that is breaking an internet cafe. Cloud computing, yes, film rentals, mobile phones have broken payphones. So this happens all the time. Maybe Starlink, maybe the satellite internet provided by Elon Musk will break BT and all the other broadband providers. Time will tell. How do you keep an eye on these things? Well, there are some ways, and for me, I read a lot of magazines. I look on Kickstarter, which is a place where startups raise funds. I certainly in recent years, not last year, obviously have attended technology shows, and CeBIT is a great one in Hanover in Germany, but there's also CES if you can make it to the States. You could also look in patents. They can give you a lot of clues about what companies are doing, although not particularly useful. And if you were really academically minded, or you could cut through them, you could read research journals. They are great sources of insight. The other one I really like to do is look at tenders. If you look at tenders, if you look at government consultations, they will give you clues about things that are on the horizon. So there are lots of ways for you to keep an eye on these changes and innovations, as well as hearing from them from people like myself on the media and so on. Now, we come back to your question, Duncan, at this point about adoption. And being an early adopter is a pretty miserable thing. I can vouch for buying technology which is defunct in a year. Early versions of the Philips smart light bulb, for example, had a bug, which meant that if the power was cut to your building or home, when the power was restored, the light would come on. So a power cut in the night, the lights come on. Not ideal. Now fixed, thankfully, but annoying when you first get them. And of course, the smart light bulbs, when they're first out, very expensive. The iPod, iconic piece of domestic entertainment, it had problems with the battery. The batteries died after so many years. They were set on fire. Early adopters really suffering, although Apple giving them a brand new iPod when their problems occurred. Suzuki, I'm not sure whether it's a Swift or whatever it was, had this vehicle which kept falling over around corners. There are many examples of technologies which, when first launched, were not quite ready, and there's still many examples of manufacturers who are producing these things in anticipation of fixing them later. It's just the way of the world. But what I really wanted to draw your attention to was the maturity or the adoption curve on the right there, which I think it kind of articulates the pains of bringing something to market quite well, in that there is this hype, this peak of inflated expectations, there's this disillusionment, enlightenment, and productivity. So as long as you're aware of this kind of the idea that there would be this hump of failure, then I think you can work towards disruption in a kind of sensible way. It could be that even early adopters are given some incentive, some kind of promise, like Apple did, that they will be looked after. Then I think the rate of adoption will be much quicker. Now, of course, disruptive tech doesn't come without its risks and challenges, and for most businesses, I guess they don't want to be the only person on the block. There is something called healthy competition, which is useful. Also, this idea that uncharted territory comes with risks, legal. I put here data breaches, privacy, safety, ethics. Policy making tends to be behind the curve when it comes to disruptive tech. You just think about drones and how we didn't have any real legislation about flying drones across airports and so on. There are things which are behind the curve. So you need to really think about the ecosystem of disruption. So if you do go mainstream with the disruptive technology, you're going to need three components, really. You're going to need investment. That's kind of obvious, I guess. But you need long-term investment. So you need a roadmap for where that technology is going. You definitely need demand, and how you create that demand really depends on the policy around it, but also whether you've got a decent value proposition. So policy, I mean, whether the government decides everyone's got to have an electric car. Whether you can influence policy, I should say, would be a great place to start. Acceptance is also important. You think about the microwave oven. When it was first in our homes and in restaurants, people were worried that they would get radiation, that they'd be sick from the food that was produced. And slowly, I think the science has been able to demonstrate it is safe, but also the scientists have been able to articulate the science in a way which is less complex and which people accept. So quite a lot of things, I suppose, to consider in order to make sure your technology goes mainstream. The story of Betamax versus VHS is one that most people know, where a technological standard which was superior lost out to an inferior one because of relationships it had with the film industry and suppliers and supply chain. So it's not necessarily about how good your technology is, but how it fits within all of these components you see on this slide. Now, we're all suckers of not being able to predict the future. And, I have my own story about going into Dixon's many years ago and saying, I want a music player, a portable music player, digital one. And the guy there sold me a Sony mini disc. And I remember saying to him, don't you think the MP3 digital music format, is going to take off? And he said, no, it would never happen. Lo and behold, probably 6 months later, we're all using digital formats, and mini disc is no longer here with us. Now, I didn't have a crystal ball, clearly nor did the salesman, but I wish I'd been a little bit more thoughtful about the way this might have gone, because I wasted my money. Okay, we've got another interlude. I've spoken for a good 40 minutes. I do hope you're not too bored. Is there anything anyone would like to say at this point or bring up? You're making this too easy for me. Anybody at all? I can see you unmuted there, Mark. No. Well, look, anyone?
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Yeah, the thing I was going to say, my background is actually in mobile computing. I own a creative agency now, but my background, I've worked for Microsoft and Palm and Scion and all those sort of businesses. And the thing I always noticed about all these revolutionary devices and things like that is what holds them back is the enabling technologies that make them work. And it's the same now with electric cars. Obviously, the enabling technology there is batteries, and that's what's holding them back. And back in the days when we had PDAs and phones, it was pretty obvious what was coming, the combined phone and PDA. But the enabling technology that was holding that back was wireless data. And so we're always sort of waiting on these enabling technologies to come along to make things work together.
You are so right, Mark. Thank you. That you took me down memory lane, mentioning Scion, for example.
Yeah.
Wow, I think most people have one of those.
Yes, I used to work for Scion.
A bit like BlackBerry, isn't it? Most people have one of those too. And
yeah.
I couldn't agree more with you that things like a battery are still bane of my life. Charging them all the time, them sort of effectively having a 3-year shelf life and so on. And totally, the combination of technologies, I suppose, is what makes any particular innovation great. And if there's one thing that keeps letting you down, it's a showstopper. I won't buy a smartwatch because I know I won't be charging it all the time, for example. So thanks, Mark. Yeah, good point. Really good point. Anyone else want to say anything before I move on? Okay, well, look, I'll do so. And as always, please do put any comments in the chat box. So let me dig deeper into some of these radical technologies which are on the horizon, which I think you need to know about. The first one is quantum 2.0. And you may have heard a lot about quantum. It's a branch of physics which is very new, still not fully understood. Most people talk about quantum computers, and there's a good reason why that's interesting, because of course they can do things much quicker than traditional computers, solve problems quicker, and there's all kinds of applications for that, not least cryptography. Believe it or not, a quantum cryptography exists, and there is a line between London and Bristol which is has this, and the reason being, of course, because if we have a quantum computer that can break traditional cryptography, all our secrets are out to the world, so we need quantum cryptography. So quantum computers are out there. Again, some people have them, the likes of Google, maybe Chinese government and so on, but they're not widespread. They may well be one day. But actually, there are some other things around quantum which are just as exciting. So sensors, quantum sensors, and quantum clocks, and I'll explain what that means. The biggest problem we have are miniaturization of these things. So you imagine that these things tend to be in massive great rooms, although I have seen prototypes of quantum things in pretty small boxes. An example being actually that there is one of the features of quantum sensors is the ability to detect gravitational waves. And that means that we are able to do things like look through materials a lot easier. So it could be, there's an application for health, for finding oil deposits and so on. But also the ability to locate oneself on the planet very precisely and easily. So if you've got a submarine that's submerged for a long period of time, that submarine used to have to come up to the surface to get a location. Now it doesn't need to. And I know that there's a box out there that will do exactly that. So this could see the death of something like GPS very quickly. Quantum is here, and it will be maturing, I would say, in about 5 to 15 years. What are the applications and the people involved? Well, there's a local company, Teledyne, Quinetic, and Toshiba own quite a few patents, as do BT. All of these things here, I think, are potentially a reality. Some people will say that, in fact, the human mind is a quantum computer, and that we could use this technology to read minds. Kind of scary. Maybe this is a new way of working out who's a terrorist or what your opinion is. Certainly, I think we'll get these sensors which can do things like see round corners, see through things. Could be some privacy issues here, some policy issues to consider. So many applications of quantum 2.0, and I encourage you to go and look at what people are doing in this domain. I did come across the other day a quantum camera which could detect gas emissions. So if you're in kind of like, a heavy industry and you've got some safety concerns about things you can't see, again, some of these devices are already out there. A very exciting area of physics which will change our lives. The other area of physics I think we need to be aware of and that will change our lives is nuclear, and fusion is pretty much ready by 2025. The government's saying, for those of you who are not familiar, basically it's the opposite of fission, which is where you smash hydrogen together. It's a bit like the way the sun works. The problems have been how we make that process work with all of the kind of heat that's going on safely, and pretty much people have cracked that now with some clever use of plasma and so on. So, the implication for fusion, of course, is that it disrupts our plans for renewable energy, like wind and wave and solar. And it could well be that we've got an abundance of cheap, relatively safe electricity, which, again, might fuel some kind of disruption in the adoption of electric vehicles and so on. So nuclear is definitely one to keep an eye on. It is matched by, I guess, a move towards a hydrogen economy. This is very relevant to the Humber, and you may well have seen this diagram about the idea that we can create hydrogen and store it locally. Two different ways, by the way, of creating hydrogen, blue and green, one about electrolysis and one about carbon capture storage. So as we move towards hydrogen as a source of kind of energy, we'll find that the gas pipe to our homes will maybe switch over to hydrogen, and we'll have new types of hydrogen boilers. But also we might well be driving a fuel cell vehicle, a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, excuse me, which in my opinion has many advantages over electric vehicles. And, you know, I know we had that comment there about, you know, the terribleness of batteries. Well, this might well be a solution. So whilst it might seem that we've got this electric revolution, there might be other technologies which are even more disruptive. And hence, you know, being an early adopter to an electric world could be a mistake. And it just goes to show how, you know, how quickly the world changes. By the way, both Hyundai and Toyota have a hydrogen fuel cell car that you can go and buy today. The problem, of course, is that you will find it difficult to get the fuel from forecourts, particularly in Lincolnshire, by the way. So the example, you know, between electric cars and hydrogen there is that you've got all this mess with hydrogen cars in terms of the delivery of the hydrogen to the consumer. And I guess it reinforces my point earlier about the need to think about the ecosystem of innovation and how that works for early adopters, how that works for everyone. Energy in terms of electricity is so easy to transmit and get into our vehicles, whereas the hydrogen needs a lot more going on. So expect a lot of our traditional gas companies and sectors and industries to start looking at their role in hydrogen. I know that Siemens Energy are taking an interest in Fiddlethorpe, and I believe that Ørsted have just invested in this too. The next one is nano. I mentioned nano earlier being one of the government's great technologies. You can imagine how very small, controlling very small things could be useful for engineering, for materials, for inspection, and we are talking about tiny things we can't see. So this has got a bit of a sort of spooky side for me. I don't really like things I can't see. Then again, I think there's a lot of exciting applications for particularly material science. The example in the middle there about having some kind of surface on a building which might, you know, collect the solar energy could be very exciting. So there's lots of low carbon applications in nano. Okay, another interlude. We are heading towards the 60 minutes. I'm pleased you haven't all rushed off to get your dinner. Anyone want to chip in at this point and cover anything that I've discussed about those technologies? Doesn't seem to be. That's okay. That's absolutely fine. You soak this up, and you've got my Twitter handle. You've still got the chat box there. So what about COVID-19? Well, you know, a fantastic example of how the world changed and how people needed to adapt. And I was so pleased to see my local fish and chip shop, Papa's there, start serving people outside, you know, with a new app and so on. But what happened to the innovation? You know, was there a lack of investment? I don't think so. I think there was more investment, certainly from government, in ways to tackle COVID-19, but also to recover from it. And we saw people become very innovative around, you know, health, things like testing. People made a lot of money from that. Fear as a weapon is a strange concept, but I guess, you know, we all went out and bought hand gel. And whilst that's not a disruptive tech, it was certainly packaged in a way which we all, suddenly had hand gel in everything. And yet I don't think the science says that there's much of a risk of infection from physical touch transmission of COVID-19. So it just goes to show that the psychology of people also contributed to the change there. If you work in a traditional industry, you might think about innovating, but what do you need to create a culture of innovation? There are some ideas on this slide, and it can be quite a tough thing to achieve, particularly if you've got, an aging workforce or a very old-fashioned workforce. I rather like the idea, this top idea, that you might be able to create the space for people to be innovative. So in Google, people are given sort of leisure time where they can create their own things. And they've actually created, I believe Gmail was created out of someone's leisure time in those companies. So giving people space to kind of do their own projects, I think, is a great concept. The other way is, of course, to fund challenges, to work with others, and to set kind of like a top level challenge and invite people in, like universities, and say, okay, here are our problems in a very open and transparent way. Can you go off and solve them? We will seed fund your ideas. I guess the other one I like is allowing people to fail, telling people that that they shouldn't be afraid to innovate. And of course, that tends to mean that they need to leverage diversity. So they need to get external people in, they need to circulate amongst professionals that they may not ordinarily meet. And it's kind of like a blending of disciplines, which really, for me, creates innovation. You may think about training solutions. So training people to think creatively or about problem solving. And the final one there is about Skunk Works. So these are groups of people that come together within an organization almost as a spin-off. And that spin-off has got more freedom to work away from, restrictive bureaucracy or policies, to work on things which it sees as potentially disruptive or innovative. When I joined Philips Research many years ago as a young graduate, I got there and I didn't see anyone for a week. No one came and told me what my job was. I was given an office and I just, I thought it was the craziest place to work. Until someone came along one day and I said, what's going on here? What shall I do? They basically said, your job is to walk around, see what everyone else is doing and solve a problem or fix something. So I set about over the period of a year, basically learning as much as I could about what everyone was doing and coming up with my own thoughts and ideas and products and services, building on those other things. But also, I was given the space. There's no pressure on me to come up with something new. And it was actually quite productive. So changing the way that people work can be a great way of building that innovation and capability. What then are the drivers of innovation? I've got 6 for you here, and I'm fascinated and excited to tell you that responding to a crisis is number 2. So we are living in a time where there are high drivers, I think, of innovation. All of these things are in your favor. The barriers, unfortunately, are also too frequently prominent. We know about risk avoidance. We know about our inability to have free time because we've got pressures on profits and so on. And all too often, of course, we get organizations that are orchestrated in silos. And really, for me, it's the multidisciplinary team which will bring the innovation to the fore. I would encourage you to think about ways also to innovate with your revenue streams. You think about Ryanair; they kind of have this strange dynamic pricing, which buy a ticket for a penny. They can do that because the money they make is both in freight. They probably encourage you not to have a bag, but also they make a lot of money on buying the latest aircraft and selling them secondhand. So the way that you make money can also be disrupted. And I've given you some examples here, but I think increasingly we'll see people with very innovative business models. Unbundling is a concept which I'm fascinated by, where we actually start to charge for the toilet on the flight, or having a seat on a train instead of just a ticket. There are ways that you can experiment with these things. So where do you start? Well, I've got a typical linear kind of innovation process for you here, all the way from finding a problem to market research to ideation. The one you may not have heard of is prototype in that flow there. Prototyping is where basically you create the solution, but you cheat. So you imagine someone has invented, and it's already been done, voice recognition. You could basically have a microphone connected to a computer, which when someone speaks, the computer tells you, or it writes down what that person said. The prototype example is where instead of having a piece of code which does that translation, you actually have a human who does it. So the end user still gets the experience of voice recognition, but they're not told that there's still a human involved. And you could use that kind of cheating method to understand whether the users or the user needs are met, or whether there are any funny things happening in your innovation. Just an idea. There are some very simple things we can do as organizations to start disrupting. I've got two examples on this slide. One is things like instant quotes. So actually changing the sales process. I think there are lots of opportunities to make that slicker, quicker, and kind of more personalized. The other one on the right here is adopted a lot by government at the moment, something called low code. So this is the ability for people to take the building blocks of innovation and be able to use them themselves because they are so easy to use. You imagine being able to program a computer is quite difficult because you need to learn a programming language. Well, there are visual programming languages where you have blocks of code that you stick together. And if you were a department working on, I don't know, collecting people's tax, maybe you could have a visual programming language with a block which says, we need a form, followed by some checks, followed by this algorithm. And that's a way of diffusing the innovation within an organization. So I would say, if you're interested in embedding innovation, think about these ways to infuse, or the enablers to infuse that within your organization. So where do ideas come from? I like the idea they come from dreams, but they rarely do. Certainly my dreams are full of poor ideas, although occasionally, I wake up and think that would be great. And then I realize it wouldn't be. Observation, totally. Trials, yes. Luck, 9 times out of 10, there's an element of luck. I love the idea that ideas come from mistakes. I'm sure we've all been part of that, and there's some great businesses made on mistakes. But I would draw you to the idea of letting the outside in. So, I totally endorse the idea of, as I said, mixing the disciplines, getting experts to come in and talk to you, educating yourselves, and mingling beyond your comfort zone, I think is a great place to get new ideas from. There are all kinds of other, methodologies about wheels of innovation and so on. You can really analyze this to your contents, but for me, coming up with a good idea to start with, and that's in the center of this spoke here, is ultimately what's going to propel any kind of disruption. Skunk Works, I mentioned earlier, this is the idea that you could form a group of people who were almost a spin-off, has been around for a long while. It created some great innovations. IBM used the process to create the PC. And I mentioned Philips, their light bulb was created by this Skunk Work idea. And I would, love to see more of this going on. I know that government has a Skunk Works, or it used to create new things. So even the kind of oldest institutions are looking at ways to draw together these groups of people. If it's not possible, if you think this is absolutely a concept that wouldn't work, you could have a project group, which was almost like a Skunk Works, led by a chief exec who had some of his most trusted, outwardly thinking people together, occasionally in a forum, to discuss new ways of doing things or new technologies and how they might impact their businesses. So I love the idea, and a great name, of course. It doesn't come with a smell. Okay, look, penultimate interlude. We've got less than half word left. Skunk Works phrase is most commonly associated with Lockheed, is it? Okay, I didn't realize that. Maybe they invented it. A great military company. Mark, you are full of insights, and I am definitely keen to hear more about your Scion days. Anyone else want to chip in with anything before I do this last section? It'd be great for you if you shared some ideas of how the disruption and innovation is grown in your own business. Always looking for good examples. It doesn't look like I've been able to convince you yet. Okay, I will move on. There are also, I suppose, sectors now which are focusing on disruptive innovation, and I just thought I'd run through a few of these sectors because they've caught my eye. And these sectors are often sponsored by the traditional big players. So, fintech, I know that there are accelerators from, well, Barclays, who are incubating these startups in order to, I guess, eventually acquire the technologies. I've seen loads of innovations in the finance world recently. You'll probably be familiar with sort of app banking, innovations in the insurance industry about tracking your vehicle to work out your premiums, chatbots to help customers when they couldn't access their online banking recently during the pandemic, crowdfunding. The list goes on, but we are seeing a revolution in fintech, and this is here to stay. I would encourage you to look at some of these things. I definitely, by the way, endorse Revolut, which I think is our biggest bank now. A fantastic way of managing your money. So if you're not involved in the sector, at least go and look at what it's doing, because you might find things within their products and services which you think, hang on, we could take this concept and move it into our own sector. Property tech is another one that's growing. The idea that there are tools for landlords to help tenants fix things, or indeed for anybody to get their things fixed. You take a photo and you send it off, and someone says, "Oh, I've got a diagnosis for that." I know people are working on buildings which change depending on the stage at which you are in your life. So you imagine your walls could move. You've got a family, you create 3 bedrooms, you get a bit older, you collapse the roof and you have a single level. Lots of things going into property at the moment, not just the materials, but the way that they are managed and the way that they adapt. And this idea that when we buy products, they may well be more versatile in the future. They may have physical attributes which we can change. We've got a car, we can change the color, we can change the shape. I think that's quite exciting for people to be part of the design, and that's important for buildings, of course. Then we've got legal tech. We've got innovations happening in virtual courts, blockchain for food. Governments thinking about identities, track and trace is a great example of sort of policy tech. And again, we will see these things grow. Maybe one day we will get internet voting. It seems to be something that we're far behind the curve on here in this country. So another sector to look out for. Edutech is all around us too, changing the way that we run education. Our universities, our schools, I think will look quite different. Maybe there are some technologies you've seen schools use during lockdown, which have changed the way that you educate your children. Class Dojo is one which is kind of like a social network for teachers and parents. We have these sort of low-cost devices and VR devices which will allow us to experience the world in different ways and learn about new countries and new environments and products. We've got initiatives like Code for Kids, which are teaching at a young age children to experiment with electronics. And we've got new ways of being educated through YouTube, remote learning, like this webinar. This is something that really has really gone mainstream in the last year. So education, I guess, is changing. And I think, traditional universities and educators need to watch out because they are quite slow moving, heavy beasts, which will be disrupted by some of these things. Before you go, this is the last slide before we've got a few minutes for some discussion. And I also want my colleague from the Catalyst to come and talk about the program a bit more. I wanted to let you know that some businesses have futurologists, and an example is BT. People who actually dedicate their lives and their work to looking out for trends. And they do this because they absolutely know that that foresight is important to the development of a new product, a new sector, a new industry, a new opportunity. So if you don't have, or you don't have the luxury of having a futurologist, then I think it's everyone's responsibility to think about disruption and to think about the world that's changing around them. For what it's worth, I've put up some of my own predictions on this slide. And some of these I've kind of nicked from the likes of BT. They say that there might be a war over water, and I could well see that happening. In fact, it almost is in the Nile. But I make some predictions here, that may or may not come true. Nevertheless, I think you'll agree it's potentially a very exciting world that we're going to live in the future, and it's one that we need to know about to ensure that we've got sustainability within our businesses. So with that said, I was hoping we could do some kind of group discussion. I'm not sure whether you'll be up for that, but I am interested to know, do you feel your businesses are ready? I'm interested to know any ideas you have about embedding that culture of innovation. And I'm interested to know, if there's anything that's caught your attention today or that's on your radar, which you think we should all hear about. So once again, I'm going to open the floor to anyone who wants to say something. A stunned silence, maybe. Surely someone's got a thought about any of this. Maybe not. Anybody? Well, what can I say? You're all very shy. The good news is that you will be getting a PDF of the slides. So, if this has been a bit fast-paced for you, or maybe there's a lot being thrown in your face here, you can at least go back and have a look at anything that was mentioned. I totally encourage you to go and do your own research. If you're thinking about quantum, go and do a Google, read some papers. But I wish you all well in your endeavors. I would like to hand over to my colleague just to explain a bit more about some of the other opportunities that the program has to offer. I will be delivering some extra webinars in the series. I think I've got cloud computing and Internet of Things. So I really do hope you'll join those if you've been interested to hear what I've said today. And I do, of course, wish you a Zoom-free, Teams-free day. Oh, yes, of course, Paula, my Twitter. It's this. I may not always talk about technology things on that Twitter feed, but I would be happy to have you as my friend. So let me move over to my colleague who's going to talk to you about the program.
Thank you very much, Fraser. Thank you for your time, and I hope everybody's enjoyed that glimpse into the future. I know I definitely have. It's been a very interesting webinar, and we look forward to the webinars you're down to deliver in September for us. So just before we finish off, we've got a few slides at the end of this deck, just talking about further support that's available. So first of all, we've got further events happening. So there's a series of webinars planned in. The next one's on 1st of September there, and some masterclasses as well. The way that our masterclasses work, we have a series of 3 workshops within those, so you can register to attend all 3, and they're usually 1 week apart, so it gives you time to digest each workshop before joining the next one, and they really zone in to the topic, very in-depth information in those. So if there's a topic that's of particular interest to you, it's well worth signing up to attend those. You can find the full schedule of upcoming events on a link that's at the bottom of this slide there. So as Fraser mentioned, we'll share these slides with you so you can click onto that link when it comes through and sign up straight away via Eventbrite to attend the ones that are of interest. The other support program to mention is called Digital Catalyst. It's another support program under the Grow My SME banner and funded by Humber Business Growth Hub and ERDF. And through that program, you can receive a 12-hour support with an expert on pretty much any digital topic that's of interest to you or you think you need support on. If you're unsure what area of support might be best for you, then our experts can work with you to work that out via a digital assessment to see where your business is at and then what direction it might be best to go forward in and how to best use the hours available. So you receive that expert support and then receive a digital plan, brokerage and the technology provider selection as well if that's appropriate. So the next few slides are just an outline of some of the projects that are available. So this list, as it says, it's far from exhaustive. So if you've got something else in mind related to digital, then please feel free to get in touch with us. Just a quick mention that the programme is currently subscribed, but we are still mentioning it as we'd love for you to express your interest to the programme so that we can keep your details to hand and contact you once more spaces become available. We should have news of that very, very soon. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from you on that. And on the last slide, Fraser, we've got the contact details of how you can get in touch to express your interest. So as I say, look forward to hearing from you on that. The programmes available to those in the Humber region, SMEs. So yeah, if you fall into those couple of categories, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be eligible, but we can confirm that once you come along to the programme and complete a registration form for us when appropriate. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you again to Fraser and thank you to all of you who have joined us today, and we hope that you enjoyed the webinar very much and have found it very useful. I'm going to launch a poll now, a very quick 8 questions, so please do fill that in before you leave the webinar and go away to enjoy your afternoons, and we hope to see you on future events. If there are any questions for Fraser or I, we would be more than happy to take those before we close the webinar.
I was just going to say thank you to everyone as well, and pleasure doing your slide moving for you, Sadia. I know it's unnerving, isn't it, when someone else has control.
No, you did very well there. Thank you very much, Fraser. I appreciate your help and support.